Everyone at school knew their story. 3 years earlier, when her brother was 15 and she was 11, their parents were killed in a home invasion, seemingly gone wrong, while they were at school. After that, they were in foster care for a while, but her brother was obsessed with turning 18 so he could get custody of his sister. He wouldn't shut up about how he'd never let them be split up. That's exactly what happened. As soon as he turned 18, he sorted out all the legal stuff, got custody of his sister, and moved them into a place. Everyone thought it was this amazing thing, the devoted big brother taking care of his little sister. Our teachers were always going on about how inspiring it was. None of us could tell anyone about how creepy he was with younger girls. He was this perfect brother who'd given up everything for his sister, and she was always going on about how great he was. She was in the year above us at school, and while we didn't know her that well, she had just started hanging around with our group. We were hesitant to go to her 15th birthday sleepover, though. Her brother had made us feel really uncomfortable at school before. He'd hang around us younger girls during breaks, making these weird comments about how we were growing up nicely, while staring uncomfortably long at areas he shouldn't, and standing way too close. Still, we didn't want to hurt her feelings by not showing up. She seemed nice enough, and it wasn't her fault her brother was creepy as fuck. At first, when I arrived, I thought maybe we'd been wrong about her brother. He seemed to have put so much genuine effort into making his sister's party special. There was a nice-looking birthday cake, a barbecue going in the garden, even though it was pretty cold out, and even a clown. Turned out the clown was one of her brother's friends from work. We were way too old for clowns, which was awkward enough, but he kept trying to do these dumb magic tricks and making these lame jokes. Her brother said his friend was doing it as a favor since he sometimes did kids' parties on weekends. The whole thing was just weird for a 15th birthday party. The birthday girl kept trying to act excited about it and laughed at all the stupid jokes. Eventually, the clown left. Had to get to his shift at Wendy's or something. That all was awkward and weird, but nothing, though, compared to what came next. The brother suggested we play Pass the Parcel. He ran the game, but kept changing the rules, so the parcel would stop on specific girls. Each layer had increasingly weird items, things that made us all uncomfortable. There was this empty condom wrapper that made all us girls look at each other nervously. Some adult magazine cutouts that definitely weren't age-appropriate. Even a pair of male underwear. And I mean ones that were probably used, but clean. I assumed this because they had no tags on them. Then came Truth or Dare. The brother ran this game too, and he kept pressuring everyone to pick Dare. The dares got creepier and creepier, sitting on his lap, giving him kisses on the cheek, or having to guess what he was thinking. And every time we guessed something innocent, he'd laugh and say no. It was something sexual and inappropriate. The only time he accepted truth was from his sister. One girl refused to do a dare, and he made this big show of calling her a baby and saying she should go home to her mommy if she couldn't handle big kid games. That's when the birthday girl actually spoke up, telling her brother to stop being mean to her friends and suggested we play a different game. After that came the cellar game. That's what he called it. There's a trap door under a rug leading to the cellar. Then the brother explained the rules. One person at a time would go down into the cellar with him for a minute with the lights off. I immediately decided that there was no way I was going into a cellar with this creep. I could tell my friend was almost panicking at the thought too. My stomach was doing flips. A couple of girls made excuses about being scared of the dark, but he kept pushing, saying things that implied we should trust him and that we were all friends here. After the cellar game, my friend looked really upset. Before bed, I managed to catch her alone near the bathroom and ask her whether she's all right. She tells me that when she was alone in the cellar with the brother, he tickled her and tried to kiss her, and even tried to touch her inappropriately. She kept trying to push his hands away, but he just laughed and said she was playing hard to get. She was really frightened, and made me promise to stay awake with her in case he tried something later. She wanted to call her parents to pick her up, but was scared of making a scene and having everyone at school talk about it. We all got into our sleeping bags eventually, and my friend somehow dozed off despite being terrified, and so did the birthday girl. I'm really tired at this point, but my friend had made me promise, and the truth is, at this point, I felt like a knight in shining armor. I had to stay awake to protect my friend. I kept telling myself that nothing bad would happen. And lo and behold, I could hear someone coming up the stairs slowly, like they're trying not to make a noise. Then the door opened, and I saw him stick his head around the door. He crept into the room and walked over to my sleeping friend and knelt down next to her and reached his arm out towards her legs. He must have noticed me because I wasn't making any effort to pretend to be asleep. I was just watching him, frozen. He glanced at me and smirked, like he didn't even care that I could see what he was about to do. I was completely freaked out, and despite feeling like a knight in shining armor 10 minutes earlier, I now had no idea what to do. I could feel my skin tingling with goosebumps. My whole body was frozen, and all I could think about were those times teachers told us to speak up when something's wrong. But right then, I couldn't even remember how to make my mouth work. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I let it go and made a faint noise. The brother looked up again from where he was crouched by my friend, quickly pulling his hand back from where it was hovering dangerously close to her chest. Then he tiptoed really fast out of the room. Every time I'd start to drift off, some sound in the house would jerk me awake. My heart was trip-hammering away, and I'm looking at my best friend, wanting to wake her up. I didn't, though. And I guess at some point, exhaustion won out, because I woke up the next morning. None of us ever went to that house again. We made excuses whenever the birthday girl invited us over, and eventually she stopped asking. Her brother still creeped on us at the school sometimes, even though he had long graduated. Rightly or wrongly, probably wrongly, we never told anyone what happened that night. No idea about anyone else, though. Years later, we found out the party was at the same house where their parents were killed. We had assumed they were living in a rental at the time, somewhere different. Turns out the police eventually figured out the brother had orchestrated the whole thing, planning the home invasion to look like a robbery gone wrong, all while he was at school, alibi in hand. Wanted the house, the inheritance, all of it. Makes me sick thinking back to that night, knowing we'd been in the same rooms where he'd had their parents killed. With the killer. I'm 43 now, and birthdays tend to come and go without much fuss these days. But my 21st birthday stands out. Turning 21 meant becoming a full adult, finally able to drink legally. And yes, I mean legally. It wasn't the first time I'd touched booze, but that night was something else. It was one of the best nights of my life, right up until it turned into one of the worst. This story goes back way before smartphones and Uber, and we'd had such a good time that none of us remembered to save any cash for a taxi home. Our wallets were starved of cash, holding nothing but our IDs. Also, it was the kind of stupidly early morning where calling anyone for a ride just wasn't an option. By the time the music faded, the club lights came up, and the bouncers started herding everyone out, we realized we'd be walking home. It wasn't too far, but with how drunk we were, what should have been a half-hour walk would probably stretch to an hour or more of stumbling around. So we set off, mucking about as we wandered down the center of empty streets, knocking over random stuff like bins and pulling up garden signs. There were 6 of us when we started the great stumble, but as we passed each house, people peeled off one by one until it was just me and my friend Sean. As I said, I know this was stupid, but since it was like very early in the morning and the roads were all but deserted, we were just stumbling around down the middle of the road. Which was why I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised when all of a sudden, we're blinded by some car's headlights as it came speeding around a corner at us. The car gunned it straight at us, going faster and faster. I grabbed Sean's arm and we both jumped out of the way, but he went down hard on the ground. I heard him smack into the pavement. The car slammed the brakes on, and before we could even move, the driver threw it in reverse and came right back at us for round 2. I sobered up real quick after that. I grabbed Sean by his jacket and yanked him to safety behind some bins at the side of the road. My heart was going mental. Sean was making these weird noises next to me. He'd cracked his head pretty good when we jumped, and his hands and knees were all torn up from the ground. Even in the dim lighting, I could see he was bleeding from his mouth where he'd bit himself. I got my dumb phone out and started punching 911 into the keypad, but my hands were shaking so badly I kept messing it up. That's when I see the driver walking over to us. Wasn't even rushing, just taking his time like he was out for an evening stroll or something. Real creepy. Before I could get the number right, he was on us, waving a gun around. He shoved me back and rifled through our pockets, pulling out our wallets. He flipped through them quickly, taking our ID cards. Then he grabbed our dumb phones too. Then he just stood there staring at us. After a moment of silence, he told us not to say anything to anyone. He said he knew where we lived, and we wouldn't want him coming back. He tossed our empty wallets back and kept looking at us, like he was memorizing our faces. He stared for a moment longer, then turned and walked back to his car without another word. The car sped away, leaving us there terrified. Sean was in a real bad shape, blood running down from his mouth, bruising already showing on his hip where he landed, and he kept losing focus, which probably meant concussion. The alcohol probably helped him stay mobile. I don't think he could have walked otherwise. He didn't remember much of what happened, likely from hitting his head, but I said I'd explain everything once he sobered up. Later that morning, I caught up with him as he was about to go into the local walk-in treatment center with his mom. It took some explaining, but once I made it very clear that some very, very bad things might happen to us if we reported what really happened, he started to understand. It didn't matter if we were in the middle of the road. Someone had tried to run us down, not once, but twice, and then taken our IDs and phones. That was something the police would definitely investigate, and I needed him to understand why we couldn't let that happen. And that's how Sean ended up telling his mom that what had happened to him was just from getting too drunk and taking a tumble down some steps. That's all they really needed to know, and they would just go from there and treat him as needed. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few nights, I kept seeing that same white car. It would just sit there, engine running, lights off, outside my house like it was waiting. Every time I tried to get a better look, it would disappear. I couldn't help but feel that I was still being hunted. After 3 nights of constant fear, I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't sleeping. Paranoia, fear, it was getting to me. I packed a bag and went to stay with my aunt, who lived a few counties over. When I told Sean about the car lurking outside my place, he immediately took off to his brother's place up north. Neither of us felt safe anymore, knowing that whoever they were had our addresses, our names, everything they needed to find us. We couldn't hide out with family forever, though. After a week or so, we both had to come back closer to town for classes and work. We didn't feel safe going back to our old places, so we couch surfed from friend to friend, living out of bags, and doing our best not to feel like total burdens. Both of us broke our leases, copped the fines, and pooled what money we had to find a small place to rent together. A few weeks of paranoia were better than the alternative, being dragged off, or worse. And so we kept our mouths shut and stayed in one piece. After all, I wasn't about to risk missing my 22nd just for spilling about what we'd been through. I remember it being around my 8th birthday when everything changed in my life for my family. I remember it being the best birthday yet, because my mom had secretly saved up enough money to buy me my own pedal go-kart, and I was more than thrilled. Ever since I could remember, I dreamt of being a race car driver. I didn't care if it was Formula One or NASCAR. I just wanted to race. We were by no means well off when I was young. We didn't have much, so getting that go-kart had meant a lot to me. We lived outside of a small town down a long dirt road, with not very many neighbors nearby. Ethan, my mom's boyfriend, was a man who worked a lot and drank even more than he worked. I'm pretty sure he was drunk more than he was ever sober, and because of that, he was hardly around. That was okay with me, my siblings, and my mother for the most part. Things were actually nice and peaceful when he was not at home, and the nights he did actually come home. We knew right away to steer clear of him, be quiet, and leave him alone. We just knew it was better at home when he wasn't there. As I said, I remember it being around my 8th birthday, because my mom had baked a big cake for myself and my 2 younger sisters to share. And of course, she had some too. Then she took me out back where she had hidden the go-kart from me. And I remember screaming with excitement, hugging and kissing her, and telling her I loved her and that she was the greatest mom ever. I hopped in it right away and took off up and down the road to test it out. It was a great feeling. In that moment, when something so great happens, you kind of forget the regular hell of life you seem to live every other day. Things were good for the next couple of days. Ethan had not really been home for almost a week probably at that point. Sometimes he would just stop in for a few moments here and there. I guess to check up and make sure my mom hadn't left him or anything. When I was that age, I hardly recall any point in time when he was home for more than 1 or 2 nights a week, and never 2 nights in a row. Us kids never knew what he was doing, nor did we ever really want to know. I remember driving my go-kart on my way home when Ethan's pickup truck passed me and kept heading on down toward home. It made me want to not even go back home. But really, I had no choice. The sun was just starting to go down. By the time I pulled up to the yard, I could already hear the yelling. I could hear my mom's voice trying to reason with him, and then I would hear his voice just overpower hers. I heard something smash. I didn't want to go inside. I could hear my little sisters bawling, and then I heard my mom crying too. I heard another smash. I decided to go in because I couldn't leave my mom and sisters in there alone with him. I peeked in the window of the front door before I actually walked in and saw the house getting destroyed right in front of my family by my mom's crazy drunk boyfriend, Ethan. He was sure that someone else must have bought it for me, that my mom must be seeing someone else who had the money to buy things like that. Basically accusing her of cheating again, just like she had done to my real dad with him. The irony of his accusations seemed lost on him as he staggered around our living room. He got out of her that she had secretly been stashing away money to save up to get me the go-kart, and he lost it when she told him that. He went on another rampage, destroying our home, throwing things everywhere. In the 5 minutes it took him from passing me on the road until I was there, he had done quite a bit of damage. All the furniture was thrown around. He knocked what was left of my birthday cake onto the kitchen floor. A whiskey bottle flew past my mother's head, shattering against the wall behind her. Both my sisters were huddled in the corner while my mom cried, blood running down her face from where he must have struck her. That was it for me. This was the worst I had ever seen him, and I was scared. No, I was terrified. I jumped into my go-kart and started pedaling down the dirt road as fast as I could. I could hear his truck start up behind me. I knew I couldn't outrun a truck. When I looked back, he was right behind me. He was going to run me down. I steered the go-kart to the side of the road and threw myself into the tall grass, just as his truck ran over my go-kart. I lay there frozen as he stopped the truck and started looking for me. I crouched in the tall grass. I could hear him yelling my name between curses about my mother's infidelity. I stayed hidden until long after sunset, too terrified to move. The police found him later that night, roaming the streets of town, looking for a fight with anyone who dared look his way. They said he was screaming about cheaters and liars, and how karma has a way of catching up with them. They arrested him pretty much on the spot that night.